Hi, everyone. I'm Shana Horwitz. I'm the VP of Product and Programs here at Newlab, joining you from our flagship location in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So before we get started, just want to tell you a little bit about Newlab. Newlab is a growing community of experts and innovators focused on applying emerging technologies to help solve pressing and complex challenges. Newlab offers two primary ways to get involved. We have our membership, which is about the community of companies that we support, and then we have our studios. So today, the Newlab community is made up of over 170 companies, and we surround them with the resources that they need to move their ventures forward, from prototyping resources to access to investors and a robust, diverse network of peers. Our studios are our innovation programs where we work closely with Fortune 500 companies and government agencies to build engaged ecosystems to apply emerging technologies to specific industry and civic challenges. The transformative tech that Newlab engages with includes robotics, AI, material science, and even quantum computing. We're really focused on applying these technologies to what matters most: health, the environment, our cities, and our infrastructure. And I'm really excited to be talking with Davida Herzl today. Davida is the co-founder and the CEO of Aclima. And I've had the opportunity to get to know the Aclima team over the last 2 years as both a member company here at Newlab and also a participant in our Circular City studio. That studio focuses on piloting transformative tech at the neighborhood level in New York City to support the city's ambitious vision for an equitable, sustainable, and resilient future. And as you're going to hear from Davida, Aclima has quite a lot to offer in helping to move cities towards this goal. So, hi, Davida, welcome.
Hi there, Shana.
For joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat.
Great. So to get us started, I'd love to just hear you tell us the story about Aclima and really where you are today.
Great. I founded Aclima over a decade ago now. We are a public benefit corporation. And I founded Aclima because I was really frustrated with the conversation around climate change. We weren't making the connection between climate change and public health. The same emissions that go into the atmosphere that are changing the health of our climate and our planet go straight back into our lungs and affect our health. And so realized through the process of really understanding the problem that we were really missing the data and the measurement infrastructure to understand where those emissions were coming from and how they were ultimately affecting us. And so we measure and analyze air pollution and greenhouse gases and a whole broad suite of pollutants at the block by block level to understand that human exposure and at the scale of entire cities and entire metropolitan regions. And so that was our mission, to really fill this critical gap in understanding and in measurement, but fundamentally to reduce emissions, protect public health, and advance equity.
Fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit more about how Aclima is applying transformative tech to create this kind of impact, kind of how you're bringing those different capabilities together to deliver the set of insights at that block level?
Yeah, so we're pulling together a lot of transformative technology into a full stack solution that includes miniaturized sensor technology, cloud computing, machine learning, to enable us to measure and understand pollution at that hyperlocal scale. Our sensors are deployed on fleets of vehicles, of connected vehicles that are driving through city streets. And all of that information comes into a cloud-based backend that then gives us this really transformative visibility on air pollution at that block level scale. And what that's really surfacing from an impact perspective is helping us understand that distribution of pollution, because pollution is extremely localized. Something that people don't always appreciate or understand is that pollution can be 800% worse from one block to the next. And so where you live determines how much pollution you're exposed to. And because of structural racial injustices like redlining and other kinds of policies that put communities of color closer to those emission sources, you actually can then visualize with this data and really understand environmental injustice. And so it's this incredible example of how we're taking, a lot of the technology that Silicon Valley and the technology community has, advanced over the last several decades and really bringing it into this space to shed a light on these really complex interactions of emissions and pollution and environmental justice, to really support cities and governments and businesses in targeting investments that really address emissions and equity at the same time.
I love that. I think, more and more we're hearing about the relationship between climate and equity and how we need to think of these things and how they intersect. But I think for a lot of people that can still be fairly abstract. So looking at Aclima, it's a very tangible example of how those things play out and how they inform each other, and the types of policies that we need to undo some of that work. Yeah. So I want to focus a little bit more on you and your experience as a founder. You said you founded this company about a decade ago. It's been quite a journey. Could you reflect on kind of what your biggest challenge has been as a founder, and kind of how you've learned from that and taken those lessons forward?
Yeah. So, one of the reasons that that this has taken some time is this is really, really hard tech. It's deep tech. It requires scientific expertise and leading edge engineering expertise. And so solving for that, it just inherently takes a lot of time, and early on was very difficult to raise funding. And I think this is a big challenge for a lot of founders, right? Raising funding. But I think for women and for people of color, fundraising is an even harder challenge. We announced a $40 million Series B in December. But the fact is that less than 2% of venture capital funding actually goes to women founders, and even less to women of color. And so, and then in addition, historically, I think it's been hard to build businesses and raise money for companies that are really targeting these really complex societal and environmental issues. But I think because of the pandemic and because of all of these issues that are intersecting in society, the technology community and the venture capital community is really starting to understand not just the important role that technology needs to play here, but the critical role that technology needs to play here. And so, that we've been sort of along for that journey with the community. But for us and for me as a founder, what I've really learned is that if you find investors that are aligned with your values, then the rest really falls into place. And so for us, whether it's Social Capital or Plum Alley or Caper Capital or the Schmidt Family Foundation or the Microsoft Climate Innovation Fund, there's this new class of funds and capital that is really, really trying to have a big impact with its investment dollars. And so, they support our purpose at Aclima. They support the way we do business. And that's been really powerful. And sometimes it feels like you're looking for a needle in a haystack. But what I always tell other founders is that it makes all the difference to delivering on your vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, first of all, congratulations on your most recent round of funding. In working with your team, I've had the chance to interact with a number of different people, all from pretty diverse backgrounds: policy, scientists, folks who are really focused on partnerships and what it means to bring new tech to market. How have you gone about kind of building your team? Did it start with a focus on the science, and then as you really delivered the product to market, you started adding in some of the front-facing folks who were thinking about the policy questions? Or how did that look for you in terms of scaling the team?
Yeah, so I think there's both diversity of expertise and diversity of backgrounds that we really focus on our team. Our leader, as an example, our leadership team is majority women. All of our scientists are women. These are, typically in Silicon Valley companies, underrepresented. And what we know is that, and what we've experienced and can speak to, is that diversity is a competitive advantage. So I just wanted to speak to that. It has been a critical part of how we've been building the business. But one of the things that, I think we were aware from day one is that our technology needed to function in society. Like it wasn't just going to be built in a silo by engineers and scientists without really understanding the connection to the problems that we were trying to solve, right? Really, building for impact means that you're building for understanding. And so from the beginning, we've had that baked in. And yeah, early on, a lot of focus on the really hard tech and engineering challenges, but and limited policy expertise on the team. But it's always been present. But the more that we've been engaging with taking our technology to market, the more and more important that has become. The other, thing for us is that a lot of times we're addressing challenges that are, that communities have been dealing with for a long time. Every community is different, and a lot of communities have been working on these issues for many years. And so we try to really approach that with a level of respect that's grounded in, collaborative principles, and where we're, really working hard to build trust in the communities that we're looking to serve and support.
Fantastic. What drove you and your team to join Newlab? How did you get connected with us initially?
Yeah, so, I think from the work that we've done elsewhere, and we've done a lot of work, across the United States and Mexico and now globally, we know that every community is unique in their histories and the way that decisions are made. Local policies and local context influences how our data can be most useful. And so not only did Newlab serve as a home base for our mobile sensing equipment and all of our, the sensing capabilities that we were going to deploy into the city, but really a home base for understanding the market, both from a community perspective, understanding the stakeholders and policymakers, but from a business perspective. And so that's just been an incredible value add, and Newlab's been an incredible partner in helping us understand, all of the different parts of the ecosystem and helping us build those local relationships. And we know, when you're coming into a new market, that is building up that intelligence, understanding the needs is just such an important part of, setting yourself up for success as a company and a business.
Absolutely. You're kind of heading in this direction. So I'm going to ask you the next question. I think will take us there more squarely. Can you talk about the work that you were doing as part of the Circular City Studio in 2020? Kind of what was Aclima's goal with that pilot, and how did it unfold?
Yeah, so the goal was to really understand and explore applications of our technology in the local community, in the city, in the state, and we wanted to really, you learn about those things by doing, right, and demonstrating those capabilities. It's very hard sometimes to do this have those conversations in the abstract. So
yes,
the work with Newlab was just a really powerful way to create example data to demonstrate the capabilities and show also how quickly we can mobilize. We were able to mobilize in a matter of weeks to map an entire region of downtown Brooklyn and nearby communities with our technology. And we did that from about early August to early November. And we built out a quarterly, what we call a quarterly baseline that was built out a map of hyperlocal greenhouse gases and air pollution. And we've shared at the end of the studio, we shared preliminary results as well as actions that can be taken with that data. That has now translating into much deeper conversations and relationships with local stakeholders and potential government customers to release actually a much bigger report later this year with much richer and more comprehensive analysis that is building out the basis for deeper customer relationships across the ecosystem.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I've seen over the years here at Newlab, the difference between showing up at City Hall for a meeting and sort of talking about the potential of data or a new e-bike to improve the way people get around the city. Right. Conversation is very different when you're just talking about it in that theoretical compared to right. going back saying, here's this case study, here's how this really looked here in this community, here's what we learned, and change the conversation. big way. And I think it's often that kind of that traction that can build upon itself.
Right.
Fantastic.
Right. And demonstrating value, right? Like showing that in so many of these instances is about showing that you're willing to commit and invest. Especially in our case, the problems that that our data is helping to solve are really complex, right? Climate change, public health, these are big issues. And so it just takes a different model and approach to really demonstrating that commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched on this just a little bit at the very beginning, but I want to ask you a little bit more about it. Obviously, in 2020, I think everybody, whether or not they considered themselves an environmental justice advocate, was suddenly thinking about their own health and where they lived, and kind of the relationship between those two things, right? And this idea of vulnerability based on where we live or how our communities are accessing healthcare and things like that. How have you guys at Aclima kind of drawn that connection or seen the reaction or kind of response to the work that you're doing, the tenure of that kind of change as people are starting to make these new links between the health of our cities and our environment, and then public health and the health of individuals?
Yeah, you talk about things being, earlier you were talking about the difference between something being abstract and something really being, very tangible and real. 2020 did that. For all of us, right? And really painting that picture between that connection between race and public health. We know that if you've been, that COVID-19 is impacting communities of color disproportionately. We all experienced, collectively, some of the cleanest air days ever in history, right? At the beginning of the shutdowns, and in places like California and other parts around the world that experienced wildfires, some of the worst air quality days. We saw the accelerating pace of climate impacts, and the tone and tenor around environmental justice, it's really risen to the top of the conversation. In New York, the CLCPA, which is new groundbreaking climate legislation, is centered on environmental justice. When I talk about climate solutions, I always say that the climate solutions that offer hope for a truly better world are those that aren't just reducing emissions, but that at the same time are addressing public health and addressing issues of environmental justice and equity. And for the first time in this entire journey, and I think for the environmental justice community, these issues are now at the center, not just in the state of New York, which really has taken incredible leadership nationwide in establishing the CLCPA, but also at the federal level with the new Biden administration. So it's just I'm very hopeful about what's possible in this moment, Shayna.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I want to jog back a little bit to your team's experience at Newlab as you kind of reflect on what it's meant for your company. Specifically, how else might you think about kind of what companies like yours who are similarly kind of trying to tough technologies, complex science and technology to market, apply it in a meaningful way? How does being part of a community like Newlab kind of support that, or how would you speak to other founders about your experience in that way?
I mean, I'll just say this about Newlab. Newlab has been sort of just singular and unique in what I've seen in the ecosystem. And what's so powerful about the community is that all the other entrepreneurs in the community are also trying to solve these really complicated problems that are really important for society and really important applications of technology. And so there's a huge camaraderie in that environment, right? When we could travel, right? Being able to go to New York and spend a few weeks at Newlab with all of the other entrepreneurs and all of the other, and all of the amazing resources that are made available to entrepreneurs. I mean, it's just really unique. And that impact focus that Newlab has is also just, again, I think incredibly unique in the ecosystem. And I found it as a founder incredibly empowering. And then, in terms of the resources that Newlab makes available, I can't imagine how much, what it would have taken for us to replicate like the intelligence and understanding that we were able to gather through the work with Newlab and Newlab's facilitation. It saved us probably years, Shayna, just in terms of, the value of all the people that you were able to bring together in one room in one meeting was pretty spectacular. So, for any other founders that are interested, I can't, just promote Newlab enough. So that's my take.
Thank you. Thanks. We didn't pay you to say that
No,
either,
you
so I
didn't.
appreciate
You
that.
didn't.
Okay, before we shift into a question or two from the audience, I want to kind of ask you what's ahead for Aclima. We are in this sea change. It's exciting. There's a lot of optimism. What's ahead for your team?
Yeah, so I think we've gone from an environment where we were having to do a lot of education about how our data was able to shine a light on, not just pollution, but how it intersects with racial justice and then big infrastructure decisions around transportation or vegetation or filtration, to now that just being something that people understand. And so that's been just a huge, to your point, a huge sea change. But we're really excited. I think, later this year, we'll be announcing, more of our work that's happening in New York with, different partners. Again, we'll be sharing the results of our campaign in Brooklyn, really more grounded in, okay, how does this translate into potential changes that can be made to reduce emissions? And, in a lot of conversations right now across the city and the state about ways that our data can support major objectives to reduce emissions. And it's not just governments, right? Big businesses are also being held accountable, and in many instances proactively saying, we understand now that our emissions are not just a risk to our business, they are a risk to license to operate, because we're held accountable by communities and we want to strengthen our relationships with those communities. And so we're seeing a lot of great momentum there. And Shayna, that's why I'm hopeful and excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. All right, we're going to switch gears into some audience questions. This one actually kind of picks up on that thread you're starting to speak about. So could you give us some examples of outcomes from your data analysis in a given region? For example, like how have customers have used the data that's been generated by Aclima to improve air quality, or sort of take action based on what they learned or what that data revealed?
Yeah. So our customer base includes regulators, so the government agencies that are responsible for regulating emissions, but also city planners, state agencies, nonprofits, and companies that have emissions that they want to manage. And the first sort of major value proposition is just visibility. It's just kind of incredible sometimes when we think about climate change and managing pollution, that so many people and so many of our customers are actually flying blind when it comes to where those sources and where those hotspots actually are. And so there's a lot of value just in that visibility in and of itself to then inform everything from city planning to the way that you might prioritize an investment in infiltration for schools, because our data can help identify where certain hotspots are and what schools may be more exposed to certain levels of pollution. We saw this in the Brooklyn campaign, that there were a number of schools that had very high levels of proximity to very significant levels of pollution, and on the enterprise side, understanding things like methane hotspots, and where those sources of emissions are actually pooling, and how to actually take it informs where they prioritize action, their operations to reduce those emissions. So a lot of applications that can directly result in significant emissions reductions.
Great. All right, one final question. How is Aclima's air quality data collection process different from other methods? What makes your specific approach unique?
Yeah, so the traditional approach to monitoring air pollution, which has been the gold standard in this country and around the world under the Clean Air Act, is something that's called reference grade measurement, where you deploy a very large station, very high grade, scientific quality, in a region. And typically, because that technology has been really expensive, really difficult to deploy, you end up with very limited stations in a city. And so what the science has shown, and Aclima has actually been contributing to this science, is that pollution is hyperlocal, that it really varies block to block. And so those traditional regulatory stations, they help you understand what's happening at the background level, but they don't really help you understand how a neighborhood, how a community experiences those variations in pollution. And so that's really the gap that we're filling. And on the other end, our citizen sensors, stationary sensors, which play a really important role in helping to build awareness, but for shining a light on problems. What we're really doing is trying to fill that gap in between, to really understand things at the very localized scale, at that block level resolution, and measuring not just one or two different pollutants, but literally measuring everything, air pollution and greenhouse gases at the same time. That's another gap in the ecosystem, is that historically you're either measuring air pollution or greenhouse gases, but the fact is that they have the same source. And so you need to really understand everything at once.
Amazing. Yeah, I remember this summer when the baseline study was being conducted, it was like each time we'd check in, there was sort of a clearer and clearer picture as you were collecting, that data week over week, day over day, over this period of time, really giving you, not just this very, very specific snapshot of one moment in time, but really a picture of what is happening at the neighborhood level.
And how it's changing over time, right? And what's persistent. Yeah,
exactly. All right, well, we're nearly out of time. Any last parting words for our audience here? Anything else you'd like to share, Davida?
I think in terms of my parting words here, and I think in terms of climate change is really getting a lot of appropriately a lot of attention, and sometimes things can feel really, really dire, right? But I do think that there's just such a huge opportunity right now for entrepreneurs who are building companies. There's been a lot of interest in climate tech and a lot of new entrepreneurs coming into the ecosystem. And I would just encourage those entrepreneurs to think about deeply, how can those solutions go beyond just emissions reductions to really ensure that you're integrating questions of equity. How are those solutions going to benefit those that are hardest hit? Taking that into account, and in doing that, there's just this incredible potential to really build a world that isn't just an air that's cleaner, but a world that's really better for all, and that addresses these issues of racial equity that we're really seeing right now, just promulgated all over the social consciousness right now. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I hope more jump in to build companies in this space.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Me too. And we'll be here waiting for you at Newlab. We hope to be able to partner with more and more founders who are moved to develop technologies, that are really frontier and pushing the envelope in terms of what's possible, given the tools that we have at our disposal today, but also that are ambitious in terms of how they might be applied to our cities, to our infrastructure, to the way that we move around, to the way that we think about equity or how we relate to one another. So I couldn't agree more, and very much thank everybody for taking some time out of their afternoon to join us and to hear from Davida and the team at Aclima. And we're going to sign out here at Newlab and wish you well for the rest of the afternoon.